Welcome back to the Bible in Context, where context is king and the original author's intent drives our interpretation. We are currently still in the middle of the test of Joseph on his brothers, and so we're going to pick up in chapter 43 today, since last time we left off with chapter 42. Again, all these are a big unit. I would listen to these together because we're just trying to step through the narrative, and we're not plucking out just little theological points to meditate on. We're kind of doing that as we go, but we're really trying to address this narrative as a whole, because this is meant to be meditated on as a narrative whole. And that's really important for a lot of Genesis, and just really a lot of the Old Testament narratives and the poems and the prophets. You know, like I said last week, the original text did not have the chapter breaks and the verse divisions, and so it's entire stories, entire poems, and entire books that are meant to be taken all as a whole, entire collections of books that are meant to be taken all as a whole and not separated out and meditated on individually. While that is helpful and we should do that, we also should meditate on the story all together. What does it all mean when you put it all together, and how does it point us towards the future hope of Messiah from their perspective, for us looking back at Jesus and expecting and hoping in what he will do in the future? And then beyond that, just how do we identify properly with some of these characters in the stories and gain wisdom for how to live as a faithful Christian in our own lives and situations. So, something I feel like can't be said enough, so I just wanted to put that out there again before we jump into chapter 43. So, let's jump back into this story and see where it takes us and how far we can get this time around. So at this point, the brothers, they have left Egypt. They have extra money. They have lost a brother. Very similar situation to what they were in when they sold Joseph. So Joseph is trying to see, are they just going to ditch Simeon and say, hey, we got some extra cash, lost a brother, no big deal, we've done that before? Are these the same guys that he knew whenever he was betrayed? Well, they are back in Canaan right now. They are afraid because they have been framed as thieves. They've lost a brother, so they don't want to go back to Egypt because they can't go unless they bring Benjamin in order to verify their words. Benjamin is the key to authenticating that they are honest men of one father, per the instructions that Joseph gave them when they were in Egypt. So Reuben has so boldly stepped up, as we talked about, and offered the slaughter of his own sons, Jacob's grandsons, if he doesn't return Benjamin. And so, obviously, Jacob says, no, that's a bad deal. We're not doing that. And Jacob, in this whole section, he is very, woe is me, everything's bad, seems kind of like everyone's out to get me kind of thing. But we do think that he might suspect his sons of foul play. But either way, he is very much a woe is me character in this section, just grieving the loss of his sons, but also to the point of not doing really anything about it, which could be a continuation of his character from the rape of Dinah, where he was just kind of passive in the whole situation. It doesn't seem like in this story we have much growth from that version of Jacob. And so the brothers are trying to convince Jacob to, despite his pessimism, to let them go down to Egypt and get grain so they don't die, and possibly redeem Simeon by bringing Benjamin down. And throughout this, it's just interesting that Jacob, he kind of barks back at him like, why did you treat me like this, and tell them that you have another brother? And so the brothers, they kind of try to cover themselves by fudging the truth a little bit and kind of lying here and saying that they were questioned carefully and asking specifics about their family, when those specifics were not told they were asked. Again, if you're reading this, it's a historical book where you know, some details were put in, some were left out, then okay, maybe they're not lying. But again, crafted narrative, that's what Genesis is. And so the author gave us the information that he wants us to have. And so very likely, I think they're trying to fudge the truth and cover themselves a little bit. Just again, more trickery to save themselves a little bit too. Just again, further filling in the character of these brothers. And so Judah finally steps up in verse 8. And this is a good sign. We've seen good things from Judah in chapter 38. Yes, he was the ringleader of the oppression of Joseph in chapter 37, but he's been through some changes. So maybe he's going to be our hero. We'll see. And so he says, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go. That being Benjamin, send Benjamin with me, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. And he tags on the end there, he says, if we hadn't delayed, we would have been there and back twice now. So Simeon, he's been waiting for a while. But what's really important here is, unlike Reuben, who's offering people other than himself and his own sons, he's saying, I will bear the blame. Give him to me. I'll be his pledge of safety. He puts himself on the line instead of someone else. And so on hearing this, Jacob, he says, okay, go. Take a gift for the man, trying to win back his favor and show in the midst of showing their honesty, and also making up for the money it seems like that they stole last time probably. He says, prepare a gift for the man, and go back down to Egypt and get grain. And he just kind of gives up, again, being pessimistic, maybe a little bit rightfully so, but I think still we're supposed to see him as kind of this passive, woe is me character. He just says, if I'm bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. And I think it's interesting within this section from 11 to 13, from 11 to 14, this gift that he's going to bring down to Joseph, this commander of the land that they don't know. They're going to bring him a gift, a mincha. And so I think it's just interesting and worth pointing out here that this is the second time that Jacob has tried to prepare a mincha in order to find mercy from someone who seems to be militantly against him. He prepared a mincha to give to Esau whenever he was coming out with what seemed to be an army, and so he prayed for help and then sent that gift along. And then in this situation, he prepares the gift and then sends his sons along and says that he hopes that God Almighty will grant them mercy before the man. So a little bit of, again, him possibly relying on God's help, relying on this gift to bribe. I don't think there's anything wrong with him sending this gift this time. It's just an interesting connection that may be there and may warrant some further study. So they take this gift, they have Benjamin, and they go down to Egypt, and they go down to Joseph. And they brought double the money with them so that they could pay back what they seem to have stolen, and they can also pay for more food. And when they get there, they're brought into Joseph's house. And so they're thinking, oh, it looks like we stole money. He already suspects us of being spies. He brought us here. He's going to kill us. But Joseph, he is seeing that they have brought Benjamin back. He is seeing that they didn't leave Simeon to die, even though it's been quite a while. And so this, so far, is a testament to their honesty. They have passed this part of the test. There are more parts to it. It gets more intense, but they passed the test. And so when they go to ask about it, the servant of Joseph, just gives this kind of sly little comment. It's like, oh, no, God gave you that money. Don't worry about it. Obviously, we know it's Joseph, but it's just him trying to seem like they had nothing to do with it and give it as a gift to them so that they could continue their test as well. And then at that point, Simeon is brought back. And so by the end of verse 23, things are looking really good for the brothers. They have their brother back. They have the free money that they found in their sacks. And they're no longer framed as criminals. And they're also about to enjoy a meal with this commander of the land. Now, it is interesting as we go on past into verse 26 and on past that, we get these little hints at the tensions in Joseph as well as he begins to ask questions about the well-being of his father, and he sees his brother and he weeps again. So again, just pointing to the fact that this is not a power trip for Joseph. This is not him trying to get revenge. He doesn't want to be doing this, I don't think. He sees this as a necessary evil in order to bring about reconciliation among his brothers. But first, he needs to see, are they the kind of people that are still going to abandon a brother for money? And so that's why he put Simeon in prison. He gave the brothers money, sent them away, but they came back. They passed the test. But there's a problem, and that's why this test is going to continue. The problem is Simeon didn't really do anything. He's kind of one of them. There's no reason for them to hate Simeon, and so maybe they need a little extra push, a little extra incentive to leave a brother, just like they had an incentive to get rid of Joseph because they couldn't stand him because of his arrogance, really. So they're not the kind of guys to just abandon a brother for no good reason. But are they the kind of guys who might abandon a brother for a decent reason? And that's really where Benjamin comes into play. So they all sit down to eat, and Benjamin, he gets a larger portion, 5 times as much of theirs. And there's actually, I think, a really good reason behind this. If you can recall chapter 35, you can go back and listen to that episode as well. We had some interesting elements in that chapter that pointed towards the fact that Benjamin seemed like he was going to be the chosen son by Jacob to be the firstborn of the family, to be the leader of the family. Joseph ended up playing that role, but it seemed like Benjamin was based on those elements. And so now that Joseph is gone, Benjamin has probably stepped into the favorite place of his father. We're going to learn that that seems to be the case, actually, later on. And he's probably the one that, as he grows, he's going to be the firstborn of the family. And he's also the only other child of Rachel, the favorite wife. And so you have all these brothers by wives that aren't cared for as much. And then you've got these 2 brothers over here, one they've gotten rid of, but they are the favorites. They're the ones who are going to have all the power. And the first one was an arrogant little kid. So there'd be some natural tensions between them and Benjamin. So if he gives them a reason to be jealous of Benjamin and then takes Benjamin away, are they going to feel that bad about it? Or are they going to kind of rejoice about it and say, hey, okay, Benjamin's gone. We got some gain out of this. This is awesome. Let's head back home. And we'll just tell our father that he got eaten by a wild animal too. That's the test that Joseph is trying to set up right now in order to put a level 2 on this test. So what do they do whenever they see that Benjamin was given more and honored more at this dinner? It says they ate and drank and they were merry with him. Now, I recognize that the word marry there, it doesn't really mean marry. This is in the ESV. it pretty much just means they got drunk. But the point is, they enjoyed themselves. They didn't focus on the fact that Benjamin was being honored out of this. There was no animosity, no grumbling. It just says that they had a good time with him. And that's really significant. They weren't distracted by the things that could have made them jealous. Instead, they were just focused on having a good time as brothers. And so this little bit of this test, they passed. Now, Joseph is going to ramp it up one more time, as I've already kind of alluded to. But this is a really good sign that the brothers are not harboring possibly any animosity towards the second son of Rachel, the right hand, back in chapter 35. So how does this test ramp up? In the first verse of chapter 44, we're told that Joseph told the steward of his house to fill the men's sacks with food, put their money back in their sack again, and then also put this silver cup into the mouth of the sack of the youngest, being Benjamin, with his money for the grain. And so the servant does this. In the morning, the brothers, it seems like, hey, everything went great. We got extra grain. The money that we thought we had stolen, actually, it wasn't a big deal. We got Simeon back. We're going to head home with our food. Everything's back to normal. And we, kind of had this honorific dinner with this commander in Egypt. So things are looking good. But again, little do they know that Benjamin's sack has this silver cup from Joseph. And so as they head out, Joseph says to his steward, "Up, follow after the men. And when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this.'" Okay, so in that, I just want to hit on the divination, because usually for a lot of people that's really weird. Why is our ideal Yahwist here, our main character, who is supposed to be the faithful guy, why is he practicing divination? Is he practicing divination? Well, I would say probably not. Some commentaries will point out, in particular, Nahum Sarna will say this, but it's probably just to make him think that this was a divinatory cup in order to make the crime heightened. This isn't just, an expensive cup, it's also an expensive magical cup. So it kind of really heightens the level of the gravity of what Benjamin has been framed to do. And the divination is going to get brought up again in a few verses. Joseph just says kind of outright, "Don't you know that I can practice divination?" And the purpose of this, again, is not to reinforce the idea that Joseph does divination. It's probably to tell the brothers that I have the power to divine who stole from me. And so when I notice something is gone, you don't get away with it. And so that's why he knew how to so quickly track down those brothers. That's probably the most likely explanation for the mention of divination in this passage. Again, I don't think that it means that Joseph is doing the little ceremony where he's got a cup of oil and water and looking at how the oil moves to divine what the gods of Egypt are saying to him. That was a common practice. So I think as far as like trying to ask the question of, has he become a pagan? I think we can read over that. I don't think that's the case. But going on with the story now, Benjamin has been framed for stealing this cup. Oh, and I do want to go back and mention in verse 3, because I forgot to bring this up, that it says they were leaving out as soon as the morning was light, and the men were sent away with their donkeys. So this may not be very significant, but I think that often these little details the author sprinkles in here are in here for a reason. And so I think the reason they left at morning light was probably because there's this idea of deliverance and exodus along with morning and sunrise and the light. It's framed in different ways throughout the book of Genesis. I don't think this in particular is framed as an exodus, but I do think it might be trying to point us to the fact that everything seemed really peachy at this point. They had been acquitted of the crime that they thought they were framed for. They got Simeon back. Benjamin was not taken or hurt, and they're on their way back home with their food. They got the extra money. So like they were in a sense delivered out of this very precarious situation. And so maybe this morning light was just to kind of show us, hey, this is, again, things seem pretty peachy at this point. But a few verses later, not so much anymore. They're overtaken and accused of stealing this cup. They're so confident that no one has done this among them that they say whoever is found with it shall die. But in verse 9, the servant replies back and says, "He who is found with it shall be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent." Now you might think, okay, well that's nice. He's not going to kill them all. But we now have the heightened tension of, okay, so Benjamin alone is now going to be the one that is taken. Based on the tensions in this narrative, that is a massive problem. Maybe not as big as them all being killed, but that is a huge problem directly related to the tensions of this narrative. So the servant searches around. Lo and behold, he finds the silver cup in Benjamin's sack. And so all the brothers, I think, again, a good sign in this story is they tear their clothes and they all loaded their donkeys and returned back to the city. So they mourned the fact that Benjamin has been either framed or committed this crime. I guess they wouldn't know yet. But it's not kind of a, he screwed up, so you guys take him and we're going to head on back home. It's, no, we can't leave without him. We have to have him. So we mourn what happened and we're going to go back and try to settle this out. So as they go back and they meet Joseph face to face, in verse 15, this is where we get the mention of divination again, like I said. But again, I think that's alluding to the fact that they are found out by Joseph. And how did they get found out so quickly? Well, divination must be the answer, because he's not going to give up that he worships the God of the Hebrews yet. So Judah, he actually takes the lead here, which is good, because this is our character that we have some high expectations from since chapter 38. And he says that we are all your servants, both we and he in whose hand the cup has been found. And so they maintain solidarity with Benjamin. I think it's important. There's solidarity among the brothers in this moment. They all pledge themselves, along with Benjamin, to be servants for the crime that Benjamin has committed. They see themselves as tied to Benjamin, and they need to basically ensure his safety and hopefully at some point return him to his father. But Joseph replies back, again, heightening the tension in this test, saying, "No, only the man in whose hand the cup has been found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." And so it's at this point in verse 18 that Judah, he breaks into this long speech that runs down just about through the rest of this chapter. And within this speech, we get a couple of very important things. The first thing being, I think Judah recognizes in his speech that Benjamin is the favorite son of Jacob, and he is the last son of Rachel, the favorite wife. And then he continues on to tell the story of the past few chapters from his perspective. And then he says that he has pledged himself as surety for Benjamin. And he did this out of care for his father, and the fact that if Benjamin doesn't come back, well, Jacob's life is wrapped up with the boy, and so Jacob will die as well. So yeah, in this, he just recognizes that, yes, that tension of the sons of Rachel still being the favorite of the father, that tension is still there, that frustration is still there, but I got to care for both of them. I have to bring Benjamin back home for Jacob, and if I don't, then I've put my life on the line, and so I will take his place. He tells the story of the past few chapters from his perspective, and in that he even mentions the whole scene with Joseph. He isn't explicit about their fault in that, but he does bring it up, and so again, it just brings up this tension and a reminder of like, oh yeah, that scene that kind of kicked off this whole test to begin with. Well, after that, he continues on to talk about the fact that he gave himself as a pledge of surety to his father for the life of Benjamin, and if Benjamin doesn't survive, he's put his own life on the line before his father. And he recognizes that Jacob's life is tied up with the boy, and so if he doesn't bring Benjamin home, Jacob will essentially die of heartbreak, it seems like. And so this leads Judah to say that he will remain. He offers himself and asks that he be the one to remain instead of Benjamin, and allow him to go back with the rest of the brothers, because he cares for his father. And it's this speech and this confession and this offer of himself in place of Benjamin, this offer of Judah's life in place of the life of Joseph's own blood brother, that Joseph, he really has this emotional breakdown and reunites with the brothers. And I think it's at this point, he does this because he recognizes the fact that, okay, the leader of these brothers, Judah, the one who also led in the betrayal of Joseph, he is now the one putting his life on the line for a son of Rachel. And so these are changed men. And the leader of this family is a changed man, that being Judah. And so the test is over. They have passed. And so Joseph reveals himself. They have this loud weeping, reunification. There's reconciliation between the brothers, and this is very significant. So it's been pointed out by scholars who have done work in the Joseph story that a lot of us as Americans, we see chapter 41 as like the big climax, the only climax of the story, because that's where he becomes king and becomes in power. He himself, we as individualists, that's the good part of the story. And this part where he gets his brothers back too, well, that's nice, but not necessary. But within this culture, this is very significant and a very big highlight of this story. The family has been reunited. The family is the community through which one has access to your history, your future, your inheritance, your God. And so family and community and nation are really everything. Without them, you've cut yourself off from your way of life. We don't think like that as Americans. And so this kind of just seems like, oh, it's a nice bonus, but not a big deal. This is a very big deal, both within this culture and within the tensions of the biblical story. Because, again, the problems that we faced at the fall were a lack of trust in God, a lack of trust of one another, animosity and hostility towards one another, and the tempting serpent. So we had Joseph. He overcame that temptation in his test. We've also had him literally come back before God and be exalted back to his right hand, essentially like in the garden. So he's this kind of new Adam figure. Again, go listen to chapter 41, our comments on that section to hear more about that. And here he has now reunified human relationships. The murder that characterized the relationship of Joseph and his brothers, of Cain and Abel, and others who had hostility throughout the biblical story, that is now repaired. There's now a tested and authenticated and true love and loyalty to one another rather than animosity and hostility, even when things are difficult. So this is really a fixing of the problems in Genesis 3 and a good climax to the story of Genesis. And really, the story could end here if Joseph were, the Messiah, but he's not. He's not Jesus, and he doesn't fully fix every problem. He's just an example of someone who looks like the guy who's going to do all this. And so the story has to continue on for a few chapters and catapult us into the rest of the Torah. But those chapters are still very significant. I'm not trying to say that you can stop reading now. They are very significant, but the main tensions, they have been resolved at this point. And so I hope you've been able to actually feel some of the tensions going on in this story and just feel the significance of the test that Joseph is putting on his brothers, why he's done it and why it's a good thing that he's done it, the way that he, as this kind of Messiah figure, is working towards reconciliation. And hopefully you can see that's what Jesus is trying to do for us. He's trying to bring all peoples under him into the new nation, into the kingdom of God. And so this is something very much that is a key tension in the biblical story. I mean, one of the things that Paul spends so much time talking about is division and disunity in the church. And there should be unity in the assembly of God, in the nation of God's people. So this is not just a throwaway passage. This is an example of a resolution of a key tension in the biblical story ever since Genesis 3. And again, it's part of what makes the Joseph story so significant, especially since he is mapped on to a typological example of the coming seed of the woman. So we do have some more to talk about in chapter 45, but I think with that being just really this big climax in the biblical tensions and in the book of Genesis, we should stop there and just meditate on the significance and the centrality of reunification in the Genesis story and as part of the job description of the coming seed of the woman. Again, I keep saying it because I don't want to be the one who says, look, a similarity between Joseph and Jesus. He must be a typological, or he must be a prophetic figure. I think there is a reason to think that, but we haven't gotten there yet. Let's just take it for granted for now that he is a figure that shows us who the Messiah will be or what he will be like. And again, a key part of his job description, a key part of what he accomplishes is bringing his people to a place where there is reunification and trust and loyalty to one another and to God once again.